I want to step back in time a little bit. We talked about that some 10 years ago in Reno. The first real OOSS meeting that I attended, I was still trying to figure out what an OOSS was. I kind of had an idea where we were going branding-wise, and I could see what it looked like on paper, but I really didn't understand the depth of identity, of personality, and of image that was associated with OOSS. And those are three dimensions of brand that are very important to understand. Well, one of the first people I met at the first board meeting that I attended was a person who was not on the OOSS board, but who came as a guest and did a presentation. And the first thing I observed, having been on the planet for a while and sat in a lot of meetings and with a lot of groups, is how quiet the room became when this person began to speak. I noticed, too, that he spoke with a very soft, eloquent, intelligent voice. Kind of the way my wife taught me one should always speak when amongst the intelligent, whether they're kindergartners or they're postdocs. The quieter you speak, the more carefully you capture your phrasing, the more thoughtfully you think before you speak, the more you will engage the thoughtful in the room. And I observed that with this man. The next thing I observed was that after the meeting, he couldn't leave the room. Well, since then, I've come to discover that our keynoter today is a heart and soul of OOSS. Don't think he's ever served on the board. I don't think he's ever actually been one of those regular members. He's always been part of the industry that has been so close to OOSS that he's just part of the family. He's one of my first go-tos on any subject related to OOSS and related to the industry, and I would venture to say beyond that. He's one of those people I would put in my mentor category, and there have not been many in my many years on the planet that I could put there. But that man is Bruce Maller. He needs no further introduction. With that, Bruce.
Wow. That was very nice. Thank you, Kent, for those kind words. OOSS is family for me and for the team at BSM. And I'm having a little heartstring pull at the moment because I'm missing my buddy. I'm missing my sidekick. I've been alongside Mike for a long time, and so him not being here, I'm having a little bit of withdrawal. And of course, he entertains all of us and inspires all of us. And so, Mike, you're with us, and hopefully we'll get to hear from him. Are we Skyping him in later? Is that what I heard Brad say? Yeah. So I was listening to Kent and listening to Brad and to Ralph, and I was just kind of reflecting because I was kind of part of OOSS when OOSS was a little bit more sleepy and a little bit more understated. And it's only in the last several years where OOSS has kind of come out of the closet a bit and decided that we're going to embrace who we are, celebrate who we are, and promote who we are, which is kind of cool. Because OOSS does represent, and some of you have heard me say this before, but OOSS really functions as the steward for what is, for most of you, your most valuable asset. And I don't necessarily imply that financially. It's the place where you get to do what you do to the best of your ability and take awesome care of patients. The fact that it is okay financially, that's a bonus. So the fact that OOSS has embraced that, to me, I think signals something very important, because the future, which is the topic Kent asked me to focus on, and I feel like I've been having a conversation with all of you for many years. Today, I'm going to shift the conversation just a little bit And I am going to speak about the future, but I want to, again, having heard Kent, I'm going to just share with you something that I think is instructive, that I think is an important takeaway for each of you in the room. When I've worked with practices and surgery centers for my almost, I'll go ahead and date myself, 34 years, I'm interested all the time. I'm curious. I'm a student. And I'm always interested in the better performing organizations. And one thing that you find out when you run, you own, you operate a business is that nothing, the success that you enjoy, no aspect of that is accidental. It's actually quite purposeful. So what I heard from Kent, which I'd like to replay to you, but I'd like to do it in a way that I think is instructive, practical, something you can take home, caused me to think about what are the key success factors in the most successful practices and ambulatory surgical centers. So to me, there's kind of 5. By the way, this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about today, so I hope you don't mind if I digress. Kent gave me permission. I can do this. One, when I think about it, and these are kind of in descending order. I'll get to the punchline. I'll get to the most important. So the things that I think about are, 1, the best, most successful organizations. They're rooted in, they're compassionate about taking care of people. They care. And you can see that in the culture of the organization. And for those of you that, are business people and think about strategies and tactics all the time, a great culture will trump a great strategy every day. If you figure out that secret sauce and if you crack that combination and you've got the right kind of culture, but it starts with, again, that deep care, concern for patient, but it's coupled with, which is item 2, the deep care and concern for the people that work in your organization. So again, the success is aligned with deep concern for patients, deep concern for employees. And that's reflected in the way we hire, the way we onboard people, the way we train them, the way that we coach them, the way that we develop career plans for them. All those are more tactical, but they're embodied in that second element. The third element is fiscal. It's financial discipline. When I look around at the most successful practice, I loved Kent's description of Albert. And by the way, I know Albert. He's awesome, by the way. What a find for the OOSS board. He is one of the real thought leaders, the real leaders in ophthalmology. So what a great thing for this organization. But I was listening because he tracks, he does benchmark, he has his numbers, he's very disciplined. Everything they do, there's budget, feasibility, analysis. We don't just go out and buy that, but there's a rationale for that. So there's fiscal discipline. So that's the third element. The fourth that I have found from my own experiences is actually what Kent described back in Reno, that's done every third year. And by the way, I'd like for you to do it more than every third year, but it's okay. Is the commitment to planning, and a lot of our groups actually do plan reasonably well. But the real differentiator is not the development of the plan. It's the fact that the most successful ASCs and practices know how to execute. They know how to implement. They know how to rally that team effectively and really focus in on and get done the things that are being implemented. I loved Ralph's introduction in what a wonderful way to introduce the OOSS gift strategy, right? And there were 5 key strategic elements. I was watching and paying attention, and that process is it's invaluable. And this is a little precursor to where I'll take you over the next little while, is because what I'm going to do today is share with you an element of your strategic planning. And the element is of understanding the dynamic of your market. Because you can plan all you want, but if you don't do it contextually, within what's going on out there, and what's going on out there, there's lots of things that are murky and cloudy, And as part of our conversation today, my goal is to make it really clear what I see going on. So that planning piece was kind of on my list as number 2. So that leads me to kind of number 1, and I watched it in action today. And that's leadership. So what strikes me about OOSS, and has always struck me about OOSS, and why I like hanging out with my friends at OOSS, is that it's a group that is made up of outstanding leaders in our field. But it goes further than that, because these leaders act the part. They have learned to be better. I like listening to Brad because I get where Brad has come from, and he's kind of embraced this. Whether he liked it or not, he ended up in this role. And I don't know if it was because he wasn't at the meeting, kind of like Ralph, but nonetheless, I've heard and I've watched Brad embrace the role, and I've watched him do that in his own practice and surgery center. I've had that great fortune of working with him. He's an outstanding person, first and foremost, who does care deeply about patients and staff and does all those things. He's learning some of the other elements of fiscal discipline planning, not that they are not successful, but he's very open, and he's a great student. And so to have had the good fortune of working with him these past couple of years in my role in helping deliver a couple of talks a year has been fantastic. But he embodies, as do the Bill Fishkinds and Bruce Wallaces and the people, again, that I know in this room, and that is the secret sauce. But it goes beyond that. It's the way those leaders then interact with administration and management. That is really the key. When I look at the most successful practices in the country with great surgery centers, it's because I have strong physician leadership and I have strong administrative leadership, and they are aligned. And they're aligned about the vision, the strategy, and the plan. And that is when you figure it out. And that's when life actually becomes easier, not harder, easier, because you're sharing the burden with those around you who care as much as you do. So anyway, I'll get off my little thing there. But it's relevant, because what I want to do is paint a little picture about the future, and I'm going to get a little bit more tactical than normal with you. So normally I'm, kind of giving you my little words of wisdom or whatever from my experiences. I'll do a little bit of that here too. But there are 3 main areas that I want to focus on. 3. It's demographics, some of which we all know, we live it, we're part of it. The second is I want to bring clarity to aspects of the Affordable Care Act that I'm not going to say are troublesome or worrisome, but we need to really understand them better. And we need to figure out how those changes are going to have a downstream effect on our business. The good news is that for most of you in the room, I didn't say all, but for most of you in the room, it is not a today or a tomorrow issue. For some of you, it is. Because there could be activity in your market that's been instigated that is actually troublesome, that is causing you to be a little bit more reactive than you'd otherwise like. So we're going to cover that in a little bit of detail. And then one that does not get any press, but it's subtle, it's nuanced, it's really important. It's changes in how Medicare is compensating Medicare Advantage plans. And that's a critical part of our world, and I'll show you the numbers here in just a moment. So we won't spend a lot of time. We know all this stuff. We know what's happening in terms of the aging of the population. We know the number of people that are 65 and older coming into the population every day. We know that by 2025, there'll be nearly 4.5 million people, seniors, entering the age 65 and above. We know this stuff is going on. But what we need to kind of couple that with is an appreciation that the baby boomers control a huge percentage of the overall wealth of our country. And they're getting older, they have money, they think they're impregnable, they're going to live forever, and they're all about lifestyle, and they're willing to pay. They're willing to pay. but we'll talk about what they're willing to pay on here in just a moment. But these are two, to me, really important elements that need to be factored into your strategy. And many of you are already doing that. You're already out ahead of the curve on this because you're bright and you're resourceful. But that ASC gives you the means to do things that is really fantastic. So the impact, let's just drill a little deeper now on the aging we get. But what is coupled with the aging is the increase in number. So what this says to me is we have a bull market in cataract surgery, and it's unabated. It's unabated. It's going to happen. Okay, that's interesting. It's a data point, but it's an important data point. And by the way, these statistics give you insights. For example, if you were managing a population of patients on behalf of a health plan, and that health plan said, look, we want to give you our 20,000 seniors. We want to give you all the risk associated with treating those seniors for all elements of eye and vision care. And you say, okay, I guess we could do that. You have no idea how many of those people are going to come see you. I can tell you based on an analysis of statistics that more likely than not, that 20,000, assuming it's a senior population, 65 and older, will probably generate plus minus 1,100 to 1,300 cataracts every year. That's important to know, because if you're going to take that financial risk, you not only need to know that for cataract surgery, but you need to know that for every single eye exam, diagnostic test, surgical procedure, laser procedure, and if you could do that and you knew all the utilization, voila, you could actually create a pricing model and be more than happy to accept that financial risk. And there are people in this room that do that already and have done it for years and do it successfully. So what's the impact of all of this? I think that you're all likely to intervene sooner as the technology continues to evolve. That's going to happen. It's happening. The patients, and this is critical, the patients are willing to pay if they see value. And this is really critical. But it needs to be coupled with the third dimension. And that is, you must feel, staring down that patient, sitting in the exam room, that this is actually going to deliver on the promise. And therein lies the challenge. So we'll quantify that in a little bit. So let's just ease our way into this. So the first thing that I think about is, well, what's going on out there? So courtesy of our good friends at MarketScope, Dave Harmon, they survey you all and they get data. And again, I'm curious, I'm interested. But what this says to me is that, first of all, what the graph communicates to me is that of all the cataracts done, about 11% of those cataracts are done with a premium lens. And you can see that toric crossed presbyopia correcting IOLs, but they've all kind of flattened out a little bit. It's kind of curious to me. Now, when I ask my clients the questions around that, the normal response is, I like the technology, but it's not for everybody, and I'm cautious about it for whatever the reason. But what this says to me from an industry perspective is we've got to crack this combination. That line should be going this direction, not this direction. That's a challenge for industry to figure that out. So some of this is just, I'm not quite there. This is what I hear from my doctors when I get my subjective assessment. I hear that I'm not quite there in terms of the technology. Well, then there's femto. And this is interesting, is that the penetration has increased somewhat to 2.5% to maybe 5%, but that's still a small percentage. But you wouldn't know that listening and tuning into the conversation. When I listen to the conversation in the hallway, it feels like it's more, but it's not. Depends on who you talk to. Depends on which practice. But this screams out to me as opportunity, because this technology is going to continue to evolve and get better. Competition will be good, because that'll kind of keep the market right-sized and hopefully result in a business model for you as surgeons that will make economic sense. Because I don't mind having that conversation with that patient. I do not mind educating them about what's new and exciting. But I now have to be able to reconcile a cost-benefit. If it were me, if it were my mother, would I recommend it? Come on. That's what it comes down to. And so we've got to get more comfortable around that. And I'm not saying that, again, this is an awkward conversation for some. It's easy for others. But in the end, it comes back to the value proposition. So in my mind, this is a big opportunity for our industry, both manufacturers, providers, because our patients want it, they're willing to pay. That's the good news. So let's transition. The ACA. It's confusing. It's cloudy. I don't get it. There's a lot going on, 2,700 pages of stuff. So I'm going to just distill it down to 3 areas. And these, I think, are relevant for your practices, for your surgery centers, and bear with me. There is a relationship between these. So remember the problem. The problem the government was tasked with solving was in large part related to the uninsured. How are we going to crack this combination? I don't care which solution you look at, Democrat or Republican, it's complicated. Healthcare in our country is really complicated. So how are we going to do this? Agree or disagree with the idea the expansion of the Medicaid program was one means to that particular end. So let's just kind of walk our way through this. I'll try to make it as painless and easy to understand as possible. So effective this year by the government raising the poverty line or raising the point at which people would be eligible, we will pick up more people now that will technically be eligible for Medicaid. And the way this is going to work is, first of all, the states will have to kind of hopefully get on board. Well, guess what? When the individual mandate, going back to the individual mandate, as part of a kind of compromise, the Fed said, we'll allow the states to opt out. So not all the states are playing, and you'll see that here in just a moment. But we are going to see 15, 18, 19, 20 million more people, 9 million already, that have now come into, we're not talking about the benefit exchanges yet. We're just talking about Medicaid. And these people are coming, and you say, well, where are they going? How are they getting covered? And the answer to that is managed care. So fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon your perspective, the Affordable Care Act in large part empowers managed care organizations to be a bigger player. And Medicaid is one key area. So again, we know what happened in 2012 with the Supreme Court. So there are some playing and some not playing. Those not playing are not getting subsidies. Those that have said we're in and we want to participate in the expansion are getting subsidized. So for example, in the state of Arizona, a Republican governor, Governor Boore, who's not running for re-election, she said, you know what? She turned to the legislators and said, if they're going to give us the money, why don't we participate? And they did, which is interesting. But I understand it because the states have fiscal reality that they're dealing with. These Medicaid lives, it's a large line item on the state budget. So you can see here in the picture those that are in and those that are not. It's an interesting diagram, frankly. Interesting diagram. Those that are playing, those that are not. Now I want to go drill a little deeper. Give me examples of where they're playing and what's the impact. So I'm going to give you one example, and we're going to take the state of New Mexico. So currently, about 500,000 people in a fairly impoverished state are participating in Medicaid. And up until last year, there were 7 managed care organizations that controlled 100% of that 500,000 lives. What the state of New Mexico did, and you can see here, by the poverty line change, this is how many more incremental people are going to immediately be picked up and eligible. So a nearly 50, little north of 50% increase. That's a big number. And what the state decided to do contemporaneously is they put the Medicaid managed care contracts back out to bid. And they decided to take the number of managed care companies from 7 to 4. So the state is enabling concentration of market share. Amazing. If you don't understand that, and you don't get how that might affect you, then you need to think about it a little more. Now, you might just say to me, Bruce, I don't really care. That's a whatever for me. Because we don't want to see Medicaid patients. Well, you need to appreciate that perhaps that health plan that now has dominant market share is also the leading provider of Medicare Advantage in your market and also the largest provider of commercial lives in your market. You actually might not have a choice. And oh, by the way, when we add in the ACO conversation, it even becomes more relevant. So not to be ignored, but simply to be understood. So you appreciate how market share is getting shifted on us while we sit here today. Now, for the states not expanding, they got budget issues. And many of them are sitting on the sidelines now, and many may capitulate, many may end up playing. Because at the core, the local mayors, the folks are struggling with this stuff, and there will be pressure back for those states not participating, not getting the free money. By the way, the free money doesn't go on forever, but it goes on for a little while. And it's a substantial portion of the cost of those Medicaid lives that is being subsidized by all of us under the Affordable Care Act. So what does it mean for us? So those uninsured, we're going to have more insured. The managed care organizations will hold cards, and the more market share that they control, the more they're able to control providers. Do you think that the United Healthcare announcements or notices of termination to many people in this room, do you think that was accidental? That was strategic. They are implementing a program to narrow their networks and eliminate providers who don't meet certain criteria. It appears arbitrary and capricious, but it's not. For them, it's strategic, and they're gearing in for the fight. And again, the more market share they have, the more ability they have to have greater leverage. So for our states, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Okay, benefit exchanges. This has gotten all the play in the press. This is easy fodder, right, when the website didn't work. I heard it the other day from Senator Paul, same thing. It's easy. But this is important also to appreciate. This is another vehicle. This is another vehicle to try to get uninsured insured through the mechanism of a benefit exchange. A benefit exchange in and of itself is a good idea. In and of itself is a good idea to give people an opportunity to buy health insurance coverage in a more efficient way. That's not a bad idea, but it has unintended consequences if not implemented correctly, and therein lies potential problems for us downstream. So the states could do it. If the states said no, we know the feds stepped in and the feds control many of those exchanges. So it's happening, and it's mixed reviews, and we'll see how it all plays out. But nonetheless, they're out there. They're not going away anytime soon. You can see the activities by state. Again, all of them have them. Some are federally run. Some are run by the states. Those that are run by the states seem to have had a little bit better oversight and management. So this is what I hear happening. I'm a small employer. We have many small employers in the room. I'm hearing more small employers say, you know what? I'm giving my employees a little bit of money. Let them have at it on the exchange. We've not done that. Will we do that? I have employees in the room, so I don't want to tip my hand. No. I mean, I feel, a deep sense of commitment to provide health insurance coverage for our employees. I don't want to send them to the exchange, give them an allowance, that's just me, and say, have at it, and then come to find their deductible is $5,000 and they don't pay, I don't think that's necessarily a good solution, but I understand why the exchanges are there. But it is spawning high deductible plans. And high deductible plans have lots of implications operationally for your staff, your centers, your practices, which we haven't, this is about remember I said unintended consequences? This is an example of that. Oh my, great idea, but execution of this is fraught with problems. But the patients, for starters, they're going to demand more transparency. Now, the other thing that I'm already hearing is this kind of narrowing of networks. So when the exchanges, when the health plans bid to sell coverage through the exchange, they realized that to make economics work, that maybe their networks didn't work very well. And so now this has also been another element out there that is part of a general trend in narrowing of provider networks. So this is also, I see, as a downstream consequence of the exchanges. Now you might say, well, it's not a big deal. It's 9 million people. They're commercial lives. It's just what this potentially may mean in the future. So ACOs. So let's take the last element of this. Why were they in here? It's all about the baby boomers. It's us in the room, many of us, not all of us, many of us in the room, and what it's doing to the cost of providing care. And CMS, the government, knew they had a problem. So ACOs they're a vehicle to help, in their minds now, solve a problem. Not agreeing, disagreeing, but that's just how it's working. So we know this is going on. And here's the good news, I guess. This is a test. They didn't tell us that, but this is a test. They're testing whether or not this concept makes sense or not. And there are elements of this that are confounding. But to ignore it, again, you do so at your own peril. But you can choose to ignore this. But there's lots of activity. There are already 366 Medicare shared savings ACOs across the country. 366, with a new tranche that came in this past January. And we're just getting the first data on the first ACOs that joined up several years ago. Now, there are also non-Medicare. So the ACOs we hear about are the Medicare sanctioned, in a sense, I use the term loosely, ACOs. They're following the government's rules, and they have formed and applied to the government in order to become, quote unquote, a Medicare ACO, which has significance because once you are approved, the 366, the government then turns around and assigns Medicare lives into that ACO. Now, those lives are people that may or may not be your patients, but they get assigned based on the plurality of care received by their primary care doctor, whether that primary care doctor is part of that ACO or not. And you can begin to see that how referral patterns may be affected by this down the road. Because right now, the patients, and I'll get to that, I'll hold that thought in a second. So these non-Medicare ACOs are going on out there, and many of them have simply said, we don't want to go through the rigors of the government's program. We're just going to do our own thing. We're not going to get those Medicare lives assigned to us, but that's not really why we're doing this. We're using that ACO as a vehicle to aggregate providers, accept financial risk, measure quality, but more importantly, gain market share and or protect market share and or compete with HMOs and PPOs whom we're already providers for. It's amazing how the strangest bedfellows are coming about as a result of this. So you can see this is, again, a large number. At this morning's ASCRS program, we had a Q&A and asked how many are aware of an ACO in their area. It was about 60%, just to share that data point with you. But there's a fair number of lives, both Medicare and commercial, that are already affected by this. So what is an ACO likely to do strategically? They're going to use their networks that they create as lever. And they're going to use it as lever in contract negotiations with payers. That's likely to happen. It's already happening. But they're also going to see these ACOs as a potential vehicle to contract back and take advantage of the Medicaid expansion. I think that will happen as well. But in the end, it's going to be, we're going to aggregate these folks and see if we can't deliver care, coordinate that care, do it more effectively, more efficiently. There's lots of devil in that detail, but nonetheless, that's how they're looking at it. And I do believe we're going to see ACOs being marketed. I know this is already happening in Wisconsin, where the big health system in Wisconsin is essentially has its own product. They're essentially functioning as an insurance company, and they're doing that in tandem with the Blues and Aetna. In essence, what the Blues are doing, they're joint venturing now between payers and these contracting organizations. This is confusing stuff, because we're sitting out here as independent surgery centers, independent practices, and as a good friend of mine reminded me a couple of hours ago, we've been out of the mainstream. We've been out of this conversation, and now somehow we have to invite ourselves back into the conversation when we're perhaps seen as outsiders. And that results in, again, different types of things that could happen. So there is going to be, in our community, and I already hear it, another buzz about consolidation. I said it 2 years ago, and there's more of a buzz about what are we going to do? Well, why don't we get together and form something? Maybe a bigger group, maybe that group's integrated, maybe it's more of an independent practice group. We're going to hear more of the buzz happening around. That's okay and to be expected. I think that whatever you do in forming, if you go down that pathway, you need to recognize where the market is going and be prepared to accept financial risk. And again, this notion of value-based reimbursement, I always love to hear that term, value-based reimbursement. I always say to myself, yeah, that means to me they're going to be giving you the risk, and you're going to have to manage that risk. That's what that really means. Yes, there could be bundled payment options, but really, I don't think so. I think where this goes eventually down the road is more larger populations are simply going to be contracted with organizations that are willing to handle that risk and manage the care in an appropriate way. So to do that, you just need to kind of understand your costs and understand your numbers better, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. There are people that have done this and done this well over the years. So let's address the last part, which is changes in Medicare Part C payment policy. So this one, work with me a little bit. It may be a little confusing, but I'm going to do my best to help address this, because it's in the Affordable Care Act. It gets no play, no attention in our world. It gets attention in the managed care world, but not in ours. But it has downstream implications. So you have to go back in time and understand, what's happened in Medicare Part C. There's been dramatic growth in Medicare Part C. Remember what I said before, there's nothing accidental about this. The government manipulated this by at some point in time deciding to change the payment methodology to Medicare Part C plans. So again, Medicare Part C or Medicare Advantage are the Medicare substitute plans, not the supplements, the substitutes. And it's 14.4 million. You'll see here in a minute kind of growth rates and where this is probably going. But you've got to get payment policy, a good understanding of payment policy to understand how this dynamic may affect you in the longer term. So this is what is likely to take place in growth in Medicare Part C. And you can see here, this is just the senior numbers from the earlier graph, and this yellow is the number of Medicare lives that in theory would be in Medicare Part C or Medicare Advantage, and this is the percentage penetration here. So today, you know the number now I've shared with you is around 14 million, already in 14, north of the number forecasted in 15, or about 30%, and that number is going to go up. But that's one dimension. The dimension that's not on here, where there's no data available in the public domain, is what about the ACO Medicare lives? Remember, the ACO Medicare lives are traditional Part B lives. They're getting assigned into these ACOs. So what's going to happen is over time, the current arrangement where you probably know this, a patient at the time of service, kind of like out-of-network coverage, a patient at the time of service can opt out of the ACO and go to any provider outside the ACO, which I find curious. How are we going to manage cost and quality when a patient can opt out at any point in time? But that's the only way this could get sold. The only way this could get sold, and that you have to see as phase one. Ultimately, they're going to allow the ACOs to essentially require in-network. That is going to happen, in my opinion, that these patients will not have an opt-out. So now you're sitting on the outside and they can't opt out to see you, and unless they pay 100% out of pocket, which they're not going to be doing. And the ACO providers could and will, in all likelihood, again, my opinion, be subject to penalties if they're not able to keep those patients inside the network. So economics will play in here in terms of penalties that are used to essentially force to keep the patients in those networks. Those numbers are not included in here. That number could be, today it's 5 million that are assigned, that could be 20 million. So it's possible that that number of 22 could be 40, could be 30, whatever it is, it's a big number. And the vexing part is it can vary dramatically by geography. So this is action by payer, and you can see the thing that got my attention here is not so much who, but it's their growth rate. These are growth rates year over year from 12 to 13, and that suggests that the likelihood is that growth is going to continue in the near term, except for maybe one or two interesting factors, and this is where the payment policy is woven in. Prior to 2006, which is why these plans had very little market penetration, a Medicare Advantage plan was reimbursed essentially 95% of the Medicare fee-for-service equivalent. So these health plans got 95% of what the government would have paid had the patient been seen in traditional Part A, Part B. Well, that changed, and you can now figure out when it changed. So between 2006 and 2010, the government took the cap off, they took the lid off, and they implemented a bidding process. And I won't get into the details of the bidding process, but nonetheless, it resulted in, last year, for example, I think it was 2012 or 2013, the average reimbursement wasn't 95% of the Medicare Part A, Part B equivalent, but 125%. While you weren't getting any more money, the health plans were getting a lot more money. And this became, because most of the companies on that list I showed you, there's one thing in common about them, and that is, I believe for the most part, with one exception or two, they're for-profit companies. So they saw this as a tremendous opportunity. The marketing dollars, talk about promoting brand, they spent the last 5 or 6 years actively pushing Medicare Advantage. And voila, all of a sudden market share grew. Well, that's not going to stop, except for the fact that the government decided, well, gosh, we're getting a lot of back pressure about that. That's not a very popular thing that we did with voters. So they've now changed under the Affordable Care Act how Medicare Part C plans get paid. And the goal is to bring that number back down so the payment is going to be somewhere in the range of 95 to 115%. Those of you watching the news here of late in this world, the managed care plans the lobbyists are in full force and they're pushing hard, and they've actually been able to negotiate from what they thought was going to be about a 4% reduction, so to speak, in 2015. They've been very effective at paring back that cut. So remember, they get the money, the health plan does, from CMS. They turn around and then they market those products to our patients. And we may or may not be providers under those plans. So this becomes quite significant because once again, we see market share aggregating in our managed care organization. So the implications for me, the Part C plans are going to respond, I think, in different ways. But I think one of the ways, if we just stop and think about that, if somebody said to you, and you've learned and you've lived this for years, we're going to pay you less money, you're just going to figure out ways to become more efficient. So for a health plan, what's their number one overhead item? It's cost of care. It's cost of care. So about 85 cents of every dollar that the health plan receives from CMS is paid in cost of care. So what would you do? If you were being capitated by the government, in other words, each year you weren't getting more money based on, increases in reimbursement from CMS. If now that number is going to come down and or be capped in some way, what are you going to do? You're going to try and control your largest single line item of expense. It's called cost of care, and you're going to figure out who wants to play in that arena, and you're going to figure out then how to transfer risk. Because most of the reimbursement models from 2006 to the current date have been fee-for-service, even from Medicare Advantage. Most have been fee-for-service. I believe in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to see that shift dramatically, and it's all economics that are driving that. And it's policy that's driving that here in terms of Medicare Part C. So I think this happens. Now, it's different on the practice side versus the surgery center side. Even in the most mature managed care markets where my doctors have been doing capitation, their facilities have not been. So we have a little runway in a sense, but this comes back to really, in my mind, is promoting our value proposition and promoting our brand as an organization, as an industry. Because you possess that which they need, which is great care at a low price. And you can do it and do it well. So this asset, in my opinion, becomes really an opportunity if I looked at it strategically. So in my mind, this is how I look at your business. You have a sustainable business model. It's sustainable. Why? You control it. You control the quality, integrity, and cost. And it meets a need. And it meets an ever-growing need, as illustrated in the first part of our conversation. It allows you to be able to have conversation with anybody because you have, and know you have, it's not to be arrogant about it, but you have a great product. So it puts you in a unique position to be able to promote that value proposition, assuming you have a good business plan and assuming you have the right people on your team that know how to communicate that. So instead of being fearful of some of these changes, I think really, to me, this screams opportunity, but it only does if we have that ability just to be thoughtful about it and figure out how within our market we can integrate, some of these ideas into our actual planning. So hopefully there's one or two things there that kind of may resonate, but to kind of augment that, we decided that we would have a little panel for the next hour or so. So if I could ask our panelists to come up and join me, and then I'll do some quick intros, and then we'll kick off this next part of the session. And if anybody has any questions you want to fire while we're getting organized here, this next hour or so will be hopefully a little bit more interactive. And yes, ma'am. Do we have microphones in the room, perchance? I was asking if we had microphones in the room. I can repeat questions as well.
I'm wondering about the ACOs and the ability of ophthalmology to participate in those, since we don't share disease models outside of diabetes, perhaps. How is that going to affect how we will be behaved?
Well, I think in terms of how I envision ophthalmology playing, even though perhaps from a coordination of care perspective, I think it's more so going to be looked at from the standpoint, if I were organizing that accountable care organization and we were responsible for providing care to a certain block of patients, that especially if it were Medicare patients, that eye care and vision care are a big element of that budget. So I can't, if I'm the ACO, I need you. I need you to satisfy a need that we have that's a big need, both from the professional side and the facility side. So I don't, even though there is some care coordination with diabetic patients and so forth, I think it's going to be more so the practicality of is we need you as part of our network. We're required to have you as part of our network. The tricky part will be, am I limited to being in one versus many? Which is a big issue because it's not yet been really clearly defined for ophthalmologists. When the ACO regs came out, that, if you read them, it just said, well, if I'm a specialist, I can be in any number of accountable care organizations. If I'm primary care, I'm limited to one. And then somebody said, well, because you're providing E&M codes, you're going to be limited to one. And I don't think that issue has yet been reconciled. And I don't know if anyone on the panel knows, but that is still sitting out there. So you may find that when an ACO perhaps invites you to participate, if it's a Medicare ACO, they might suggest to you that you can only be with them, which is also going to create some challenges. If it's a non-Medicare ACO, then you're not subject to those same limitations. Okay, why don't we kick off our panel discussion. I'll introduce each panelist, who will in turn give some remarks. And then we'll have some Q&A with all of you. Our first panelist, Bill Prentice. Bill is an attorney. Bill is the CEO of the Ambulatory Surgery Center Association. And I'm just thrilled that Bill is able to be with us today. Now, Bill is also, we've asked him to do a little double duty here. We've asked him to actually feed and weave into his comments some of what Mike Romansky was otherwise going to address. Bill?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. ASCA works very closely with OOSS, on many fronts, but particularly on advocacy in Washington. And I'm particularly pleased to note that we actually share a board member. Dr. David George serves on the OOSS board and is finishing up his second term on the ASCA board. So it's great to have that perspective on our board. This was a great presentation and hit on some of the major things that are obviously at work nationally and that obviously are getting a lot of attention in Washington. I will tell you that when you have to step back and look at Washington, one of the things you have to first recognize is that it is so bitterly partisan now that the relationship between the parties and the representatives in the House and Senate, broken down by Democrat and Republican, is so fractured and so poisonous that it is really hard to get things done. And I think that, you've all experienced that on some of the big issues that, we're contending with here in healthcare. The Affordable Care Act, for example. I think, as Bruce pointed out, there are a lot of flaws in that 2,800-page law. There's some good ideas in there. There's some bad ideas. If you had the opportunity to sit down with some congressional Democrats in a kind of off-the-cuff discussion, they would freely admit that there are many things wrong with the Affordable Care Act that they wished had not been included in it, and certainly wish weren't being enacted today. But because of the binary nature of things in Washington, you either have to be for the Affordable Care Act or you have to be for its repeal. There's no opportunity for middle ground right now. I will answer the question that is in many of your minds. Will the Affordable Care Act potentially be repealed? And my answer to that over the foreseeable future is no. When you look at the political makeup of the Congress and the White House, there is no pathway forward for a repeal of the Affordable Care Act. As long as the Democrats either control the Senate, and it's probably 50-50 about whether or not they will control the Senate after this coming November's election. Even if they don't control it, they will have a large enough minority that even after 2016, if a Republican is elected president, you will not have an opportunity to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And I will tell you, the Republicans know that. The Republicans can count, as well as anyone else. And I think they recognize that the opportunity to repeal while it has, political value to them as they're campaigning, in practicality, it's not going to happen. And what that means is that eventually, and I'm not sure if it's after this election or it might have to take until after 2016 and we go through another presidential cycle, there will be, I think, an effort on both sides to fix some of the things that will become readily apparent as flaws, in that law, which has so many moving pieces. A quick example of one that I think you'd find some consensus on is the employer mandate. We heard about the individual mandate, but there's actually a requirement in the law that says that employers with 50 or more employees must provide health coverage to their employees. And I think a lot of Democrats regret that provision's in there because they recognize that it's actually a problem, because all of a sudden then the incremental cost of adding that, from that 49th employee to a 50th employee is not just the cost of that employee, but it's also the cost of health insurance for 49 other people. So I think eventually we're going to get to a place where the rhetoric will not be replace, it will be fix, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to sand off some of the really rough edges of the Affordable Care Act. The question, of course, will be by that time, how much will it be deeply rooted and very hard to change? I imagine at the Askers meeting, they probably spent a lot of time talking about SGR and the issues there with trying to fix the physician payment schedule. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the parry and thrust on that, other than to point out that issue again is a perfect example of just the bitter partisanship in Washington and the inability to fix even the most pressing problems we face. Because, never was there a better opportunity to fix that flawed SGR policy than this year. The cost of fixing it was dramatically lower this year than it was last year. And that little dip, because of a variety of economic factors, presented actually the perfect storm, the perfect opportunity for Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate to come together and fix this problem once and for all, and they couldn't do it. Instead, of course, they passed another one-year fix for it and left the hard work to that magical time after the election. Members of Congress love to believe that there's going to be this time after whatever the next election is when they'll magically, set aside their differences and take care of these big issues that bedevil our country. That's unlikely to happen, and I'll give you my most darkly cynical perspective on that. The main reason that the Democrats and Republicans never seem to find the time or the opportunity to fix the SGR for you physicians is because it's not in their political interest. When you think about it, the one thing that every member of Congress needs to do is to be reelected in 2 years. And to do that, they need money. They need campaign contributions. And what surer way to get campaign contributions from the physician community than to know that every year you're going to come hat in hand to Washington begging for relief from a huge cut in physician payments, currently about 25%. They'll never admit it. They'll never tell you about that. But I think that is the primary barrier to a long-term fix for the SGR. I'd like to think that I'm wrong. Obviously, I'm hoping, and we work very hard to try and overcome that barrier, but I think that's the reality of the SGR. When you look at the things that we're working on in Washington, this is both from the OOSS and ASCA perspective, and by the way, let me tell you how great it is to work with Kent and Mike on these issues, and Mike Romansky is an absolute treat to work with in Washington and such a bright guy on all the legislative and regulatory things that impact us. So I'm certainly hoping he gets well real fast, and I'm sure that you'll really appreciate the slides he put together that dive in a lot greater detail than I'm about to go into on some of these issues. When they get those out to you, I think you'll be impressed with all the things that we've been working on. But really, when you break down the things we work on, it falls into two big buckets: payment and quality. On the payment front, we have our ASC legislation that would, among other things, try and fix one of the flaws in the way we're reimbursed that creates that huge difference between what hospital outpatient departments are being paid each year by Medicare versus ASCs, and that's the fact that we're updated using two different inflation factors. ASCs, bizarrely, are up. CMS uses the Consumer Price Index for earned consumers, which is an inflation index that looks at broad economic factors like housing cost and heating oil cost, and has nothing to do with the cost of goods and services that you actually use in the ASC. Now, opposed to that, the hospitals and others are updated using the hospital market basket, which looks exactly at the things that hospitals purchase and employ and the costs related there too. And as a result of the difference between that CPIU and the hospital market basket, in addition to the fact that hospitals are reimbursed higher than us anyway, each year that the difference in inflation means that delta between HOPD rates and ASC rates continues to get larger. It makes no sense. Doubling down on that, one of the flaws in the Affordable Care Act is that it instituted on all Medicare payments a mandatory productivity adjustment. So meaning after CMS has done its math work to determine the impact of inflation to set the rates for next year, once it comes to its conclusion, then they need to whack off a little bit to account for productivity. The problem for us is that using that consumer price index, that already has productivity accounted for. So as a result, when Medicare does that at the very end of the equation for us, we're getting hit twice for productivity. Even the CMS actuaries have acknowledged in writing that this makes no sense. So that's one of the main features of our legislation, is to do away with that consumer price index so that at least, even though there'll still be a differential between our rates, the ASC to HOPD delta won't get larger. The other thing that's really in play in Washington from a payment perspective that you should be aware of is the concept of site neutrality. And this is the thought that folks both on Capitol Hill and in the agencies are looking at when they look at the Medicare program is figuring out, does it make sense that we pay 3 different rates for the same procedure based upon the site of service? Why do we pay X in the hospital, Y in the ASC, and Z in the physician office if they're doing the same thing on the same patient and there's no risk differential? That is a big open question that's going to require a pretty complicated answer. Many of you probably saw that the Office of Inspector General for CMS last week issued a report on this very topic and pointed out that if HOPD rates were reduced to ASC rates for Medicare, it would obviously save the Medicare system billions of dollars a year. I can't tell you that something's going to happen definitively on that topic in the very near future, but it is receiving a lot of attention. And obviously, there is a lot of moving pieces in that. I will tell you that the ASCA response to that report was one of caution, because one of the first things that we wanted to point out to folks is the A&C reimbursement is already too low for many of the procedures we perform. So to bring down the hospitals to our level isn't going to fix a problem. It's going to make a problem get worse and potentially have access issues. Now, there's an upside to the idea of obviously blending the rates between ASCs and HOPDs. For one thing, it would bring the lobbying power of the hospitals and their efforts to increase rates to put into our advantage if our rates were linked. So it's something to think about. But I think we have to proceed with the issue of site neutrality with caution, because there's a lot of elements to it that really need to be worked out before it could be endorsed. On the quality front, I know Mike had a number of slides to talk to you about what's been happening with our ASC quality reporting program. I think we were all pleased to see that due to the group efforts of ASCA, OOSS, the ophthalmic community, and the hospitals, we were able to overturn one of the new quality measures that was planned to be enforced on ASCs that we believe was inappropriate for our setting. And one of the real concerns we have with our ASC quality reporting program is it being hijacked by CMS and having them apply to us measures that really don't belong in our setting. We are very supportive from the ASC perspective of having a CMS quality reporting program. We were actually endorsing and fighting for one for a number of years. We're very pleased to have one because we view it as being the perfect platform for us to be able to show and prove to policymakers, patients, and the public the high level of care that's being provided in our setting. Because for too long, hospitals and others were able to portray the quality in the ASC setting as being less than stellar when we knew that was different. And this program is a great opportunity for us to be able to prove that case. The problem is that CMS now seems willing to use that program for its own ends. And our concern is, and they've actually acknowledged this, is that they're going to actually try to use this program to apply utilization measures to ASCs, something that we think would be a complete hijacking of this program and inappropriate. There are plenty of other really appropriate quality measures that really look at patient safety and patient care that we think need to be embedded in our program. And we don't think we have time to have that program be hijacked for that use right now. Finally, I think the one other thing on quality that I want to make you aware of, and I know was in Mike's slides, is we have coming down the road in the next couple of years a patient experience, a care survey that builds off of what those of you who have worked in hospitals were the HCAP surveys, the patient satisfaction surveys. So within the next 2 years, for certain, our patients are going to be expected to fill out this patient experience care survey, which will have some 40-odd questions to describe the type of care they received in the ASC. Now, really importantly, hospital outpatient apartments are going to be required, or patients in hospital outpatient apartments are going to be filling out the same survey. So for the first time ever, we're going to have a true apples-to-apples comparison on a measure that I think will be very informative. And I don't know about you, but I feel that ASCs are going to come out really, really well in that apples-to-apples comparison. Of course, that's dependent upon every ASC really focusing in on that patient experience. We're actually partnering with the research arm of the American Hospital Association called HRET, the Harvard School of Public Health, and some others on a project that's being funded by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality to instill true use in a safe surgery checklist in the outpatient setting. So this is a project that actually covers both hospital outpatient apartments, ASCs, and eventually may even get down to office-based clinics. And even though we're obviously required by CMS through the quality reporting program to use a safe surgery checklist, the purpose of this project is to make sure that that checklist is being used meaningfully in centers. And I know that it probably already is in the great majority of centers out there, but I think that the really great value for this project, and if you have the opportunity to participate in it, you can actually go on the ASCA website and find out more about it, is that it's really, I think, going to assure you that you're at the top of your game and that your staff is at the top of their game in terms of that patient experience, because I think that will really help centers when this patient experience, a care survey, comes online. Bruce, I know that we have a limited amount of time, and I can only project Mike for so long.
You're doing good.
So
you're making me proud.
I think what I'll do is I'll turn the microphone back over to you and let us get on to the other panels.
Thank you, Bill. Why don't we do this? Let's take a question or two, and then we'll shift to the next panelists. I've got one, but anybody else? Yes, ma'am. So if there's expected to be a physician shortage, I just want to make sure I get that right. If there's expected to be a physician shortage, how does that play into the ACO?
They're going to limit the number of physicians because they'll be playing with ACOs, but they also expect to limit physician shortage because of the number of patients that they're creating. How does that all play out?
Well, the question is that, with a physician shortage, and if you're going to have ACOs limiting the number of physicians in those ACOs, what's the end game there? Well, one, you'd have to believe that ACOs are actually going to become a dominant player in the healthcare system. And I would argue that that's an open question. Despite the number of ACOs that have formed, in the Medicare program, and as Bruce mentioned, there's any number of ACOs or ACO-like, groupings forming on the commercial side. Still, the equation is going to get to, does that become the latest apparition of HMOs? And the same things that kind of beat back HMOs, a generation ago, are those same dynamics going to come back into play? Are we going to have another, huge play for a patient's bill of rights again in a few years? I think that's an open question. The other big issue with ACOs that needs to be, really hammered out is the impact they have on competition and the marketplace. I mean, we've already seen in certain healthcare marketplaces around this country prices rise as a result of reduced competition where one health system has purchased another. To the extent that these ACOs end up doing that, and then to your point, blocking out others and limiting competition and limiting access to patients, what will that bottom line impact be, not only on quality, but also on cost? And it's something that, we've been trying to point out to policymakers to keep a close eye on the impact on competition, that is wrought by ACOs and these narrowing of networks, both on the Medicare and the commercial side, because you may not like what you find.
Just one data point, Maria, that you may have seen on one of the slides a reference to pioneer ACOs. These were kind of the first generation of ACOs pre-ACA, and there were 32 of them. There's now only 23 of them. So 9 of them dropped out. Why did they drop out? Because the bargain that was negotiated, the promise, the ask, the savings wasn't there. And they said, for us, why continue to incur the cost necessarily, subject ourselves to the regulations when we don't see the benefit. So again, it's a test, remember? This is just phase 1. This is going to take a while to play itself out.
And if I could just add on the Medicare side, the price to pay for forming an ACO is obviously to show that you're producing global savings on the Medicare spend for that patient base. Now, as Bruce mentioned out, the real problem is those patients don't opt into the ACO, nor do they know necessarily that they're in the ACO, so they can go wherever they want, which is obviously a true flaw. So that's a big complicating factor.
Trex?
Yes, these pioneer ACOs were begun in 1995 with the Medicare Modernization Act, and of that group, one of them did save money at $15 per member per month. Every other one costs more than fee-for-service. And I think that there is a little message that we all can take from that. Those who don't read history are destined to relive it.
Okay, when you have questions, if you could just come to the microphones right there in the middle. Yes, sir.
I appreciate everything I've heard for the last 45 minutes, the analysis, what you guys are doing in Washington. It's encouraging, but I can see the fight ahead, okay, especially for you. One comment and one question, which kind of tracks with what you were talking about earlier. Every 3 years we get a call from our Blue Cross contractor, okay, and we typically haggle over fee schedules and the few things that we need an increased reimbursement on and that sort of thing. Well, this year, at the end of his email, he wanted to meet with us, but there was a set of bullet points that was a little unusual. He was curious about our accreditation and patient satisfaction and all this stuff. Well, I just left the academy and had been in a meeting where the presenter said, look, get involved with your contractor, invite them in, show them what you're all about. We did. We rolled out the red carpet. And it was an amazing meeting. You could tell this guy, he knew nothing about ASCs. He wanted to learn everything about what we did. I mean, his whole personality changed. We've been dealing with this guy for 8 years, And so we sent him back with a set of HHHC standards and a lot of other things. So it's like we were finally on his radar for a different reason. You probably know better than me why, but I think your matrix kind of laid some of that out. Now it's starting to make sense. Now my question is, what fight lays ahead as we as private ASC owners become really more competitive with the hospitals? What fight do you see that lays ahead between us and the hospitals? Because they're going to want to compete with us on that level at some point. Does my question make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Look, there's obviously, any marketplace has competition, and obviously for a long period of time, hospitals had no competition when it came to outpatient surgery until the creation of ASCs. We have obviously grown dramatically over the last 40 years. In given marketplaces, you've seen hospitals fight vigorously against, the development of ASCs and other, places, obviously depending upon the relationship of their physicians. They've partnered with them on the creation of ASCs. I think we've seen, because of the price differential that hospitals have been able to negotiate, both through Medicare and on the commercial side, huge advantages for hospitals to actually purchase ASCs and convert them into hospital outpatient departments, something that we've been pointing out to policymakers as a concern. Going forward, though, everything is a competition. In Washington, D.C., there are winners and losers every day, every time Congress takes a vote. For us to win, we need to match the intensity of our opponents, whether that be the insurance companies, whether that be hospitals and health systems, regardless. And to date, we have done a very poor job of that. In terms of the political power of ASCs in this model, we have the power of the idea, we have the power of the experience and the efficiency and the high quality and the patient satisfaction. But in terms of having the megaphone to really point that at the policymakers, we have been woefully deficient. ASC is very small, OOSS is very small. It can't be Bill Prentice and Mike Romansky trying to be that microphone and trying to convince 535 members of Congress and thousands of regulators of the value of ASCs to the American healthcare system. You have to do that. We are outspent 20 to 1 by the hospitals and by a similar amount by the insurers. And if just put this in really most simple terms, if every ASC, every Medicare licensed ASC would just cumulatively amongst the surgeons and the staff raise $1,000 a year for political action dollars, we would match the hospitals. We would match the insurers. Think of the opportunities that would give us in terms of having access to the people that make decisions and all the things we've been talking about. Now, you're not buying their vote. You are buying, though, the opportunity to tell your story. And I will tell you, on the merits, on the facts, if you have an equal opportunity to tell your story versus that of the insurers and the hospitals on these issues, we win.
Okay, I want to be respectful of our panelists, so I'd like to introduce one of my dear friends, Eric Donenfeld. How does it feel to be immediate past president? Is that good?
Feels great.
Immediate past president of ASCRS.
What do you think, Brad?
You guys are going out to celebrate. Can I join you? Take my job, please. Where are my BSM people? But Eric, just to give some perspective, founder of Ophthalmic Consultants of Long Island, as well as the Island Eye Surgery Center, a friend to ophthalmology, someone who is intimately involved in the business of the ASC. So thank you so much for making time to join us.
Thanks. I can just listen to Bruce talk all day long. He's, I think, the best at what he does, and he's been really an advisor to me and to our surgery center for about 20 years now. Been a long time and a very good relationship. So I think when you come to these meetings and you hear what's been said, you leave with a sense of pessimism, and that's just not my style. I see the glass as full. My statement today is the golden age of ophthalmology in ASC is today, and tomorrow can be even better. And there's a lot of reasons for that going forward. I think the future of ASCs requires demand, opportunity, and solutions. And the demand is really right here in front of you. If you want to talk about a golden age, being at the right place at the right time, we're here right now today. The Generation Ys are just entering prime LASIK age. They're just getting there, and LASIK is taking a shot down. And I don't want to talk about LASIK. This is more about cataracts, obviously. But the Generation X is just a small market, almost half the size of the baby boomers and the millennials. But when you look at this double humped curve, you see that the baby boomers are moving into cataract age in an amazing number, and the Generation Ys are moving into LASIK era in an amazing number. And this is just all good for us. Just be prepared for the volume. You know, we talk about physician shortages. I'm not quite certain ophthalmology is going to apply. We just need to improve our productivity. I think we can do a lot more than we're already doing, and you have to do it with an efficient organization. And what better efficient organization is there than a well-run private ASC? The other demand going forward is that the greatest generation, you know, the people who are now in their late 60s, 70s, and 80s, certainly the World War II vets, they didn't care. I mean, nothing mattered to them. They lived a quality life, and they were just thankful for everything that they had. Baby boomers are not like that, and we're demanding. And when you look at the number of patients who have astigmatism and are looking for premium outcomes, it's there, and it's there in enormous numbers. 50% of our patients who come in for routine cataract surgery have astigmatism of 0.75 diopters or greater. So the opportunity is that there are 4 million patients a year who have the opportunity for a presbyopia solution. And that brings me to an issue I'll bring up a little bit later. OOSS has to be aware that we're tied into technology. With better technology, OOSS becomes more successful. At ASCRS, one of my main goals was to try and break some of the logjam that's occurring in Washington with the FDA. If you worry about ASCs and these issues by themselves, it can't happen. We have to also worry about the entire picture. We have to have access to new technology. With new technology, it brings more patients into our ASCs and makes us more profitable, not only on the ASC side, but also on the practice side as well. And 2 million patients a year will have the opportunity for an astigmatism solution, and they're going to want it, and they're going to want it in large numbers. So the opportunity, again, is demanding patients coming forward with disposable incomes. And the bottom line is that anything a hospital can do, we can do better. We can do it faster, and we can do it more economically. And as a matter of fact, we've heard a lot about Washington here today, and I listened to all this, and and I think it's important that we be there. You have to be a presence, but I'm more worried about the hospitals, to be quite honest with you, at this point, going forward, in that the hospitals are not playing with a level playing field. You know, if you have a level playing field, I'm fine. I don't even mind if it's a little bit of an incline. I'll fight someone on an incline, but don't make it me climbing Mount Everest to fight somebody. And that's the way it is right now. And I'm just very hopeful that with OOSS and with our leadership, we can make a difference and make this a more level playing field where we can all get in there together. Insurance is changing. Again, we're reliving, and I love your statement that if you don't pay attention to history, you're bound to repeat it. And we're going through an area now that we went through about 20 years ago, and the ASC is just vital. If anyone who's looking at managed care and carve-outs for eye care, and you don't understand that the ASC is the linchpin to the solution here. It's no more just fee-for-service in the future. It's going to be bundling. And if you want to bundle, you got to pick your partners you're going to bundle with. And who are you going to want to bundle with? I want to partner with you. I want to, you're the guys that I want to be partnering with. And bundle payments are going to be a challenge. But as Bruce said before, an amazing opportunity for us because, how are you going to find someone more efficient than we are today? You just can't find that. So the opportunity for there is really very exciting as well. As a matter of fact, we talked about, OOSS going to Washington and ASCRS help. And again, the partnership between ASCRS and OOSS is extraordinarily important. We are kindred spirits. We are absolutely on the same page every step of the way. And anything that ASCRS can do to help, my allegiance is to certainly both organizations. But when you look at what's happening, it's really quite unbelievable with these managed care carve-outs. Let me just move forward, and for the sake of time, opportunities of new technology, these are great for ASCs. You have to have a reasonable profit margin so that when you develop a new technology, the doctor has to profit, and Bob Nelson, our surgery center has to profit as well. And you know something, and it works out well for everybody going forward. And again, keeping that patient-shared billing opportunity open is really very important. So what I'm more concerned about is I'm more concerned that we as a group and certainly individuals, that we have the courage to make good long-term decisions. We're really at a point in our lives where there's a lot of concerns for all of us. You get frightened when things change. It's not business as usual. And the only thing I would say to this large group is make decisions based on information, looking at what's best for you and best for your patients for the long term. Don't make decisions because you're afraid of what's going to happen. I think we can weather this storm and come out way ahead at the end of the day. I think we need to promote patient-shared billing into your surgery center and your practice. You need to expand your practice in your ASC. In New York, we have many ASCs around us. We want to partner with all these ASCs. In these days, it's either go big or go home. And when you go big, you make sure you partner with the right people, because when you get into bed with somebody, you got to make sure that they have the same ideas you have. They've got to be cost effective, they've got to be ethical, and you've got to have the right people that you're working with. Document your superior outcomes to bring third-party payers. And I heard before a little bit about the government wanted us to document our outcomes at a surgery center. And I know that's not what we do. But on the other hand, I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily, because I have to believe that down the line, they're going to be documenting everybody's outcomes. And if you want to document outcomes with me or with a surgery center where, with a hospital center where, I'll say it here in this group, that the doctors who are operating that surgery center are operating with one hand tied behind their back. They've got lesser facilities, they don't have the care that we provide, and the most part, these are not as good surgeons as you are. I mean, these are not good surgeons. If you want to compare my results to their results, go ahead. Let's make it a fair fight. So I think documenting outcomes is going to be really good, and then we've got to take our results and we've got to make people aware of them. We can't just say we're really good. We've got to go to the internists in the area, we've got to go to the accountable care organizations. We may even have to go to the hospital and say, what you're doing, we can do better than you can do it. Why would you want to get into this market when we can partner together? And finally, belong and support organizations and PACs that assist ASCs and new technology like OOSS and like ASCRS. Bruce, thanks.
Okay, any questions at this point? All right, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Trex Topping. Trex is currently the President and Chief Medical Officer of Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston. Thank you for hosting us in your fine city. Also, Trex has been intimately involved in oversight of the ASC business at OCB, and in his spare time has also been involved actively in government relations for the Academy. Trex?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Think of yourselves as being real incredible pathfinders. You have all been working to develop a very efficient, high quality, effective way to deliver superior care to your patients. You've done it in a very cost effective manner, and you can be very proud of what you've done. And I'm proud to be here with you all. I think that the ASCs are actually a key to success in the ophthalmic future. We all know that the cost of healthcare is skyrocketing. However, the lower cost of our ASC facility fees is a very strong advantage over the HOPD rates. And I will say, from my perspective, the HOPD rates are experiencing downward pressure. And I would also say, do not expect your ASC rates to go up very much. The reality is Washington doesn't have any more washcloth to squeeze water out of, and I don't think we're going to get more from them. The ACOs, I think, will certainly want you. They are looking for cost-effective care, and your care is the paradigm of cost-effective. Just think about it. We talk about paying for quality and not quantity. There are all sorts of spooky, quick words that are tossed around in Washington. However, the government does not know how to measure quality. They did PQRI, PQRS measures. They decided they didn't like those because those are process measures. And they thought that that really wasn't a good measure of how good you are. But just think about it. Because of the process measures of putting betadine in the eye before your cataract surgery, you get very, very low endophthalmitis rates. You're so good at what you do that they can't separate you one from the other. You really have shown what quality is. Now they want some outcomes, and you know all the details about how that's been put off a ways. Unfortunately, the government can't figure out how to measure the quality of the surgeon versus the quality of the facility. It's a very interesting challenge. Sometime maybe people in Washington who make decisions ought to be involved with patient care. Maybe not. Anyway, we have a conflicting future environment. We will be forced to cope with increasing regulation. These are made often by people who do not understand the issues, and the ophthalmic ASCs are really viewed very little differently from the multi-specialty ASCs. It's important, I think, that the rules and regulations for our eye ASCs represent what eye care is really about. Or is this an issue of hospitals attempting to restrict ASCs? Is it motivated by quality on their part? Or is there a market share issue? And I guess I'll let you chew on that, but I think we all know the answer. So there will indeed be a downward pressure on both fees and reimbursements, but I think we can all feel very proud and happy of what you all are accomplishing and have accomplished in the ASC environment for eye care. I think that there is a bright future, or it's at least brighter than it is for hospitals and physicians. The most common surgery in Medicare is the cataract operation. Cataract surgery, think about it, is actually the best buy in all of medicine and surgery. Your outcomes are magnificent. Don't forget, I'm a retina doc, not a cataract surgeon. Your outcomes are magnificent. I think that means quality. Your costs are very low. You're a real bargain. I think that's it. Yes.
Thank you, Trex. That was great. I want to come back actually to a gentleman's comment that he made previously. I want to tie it back to something that Bill said, something I think Eric and Trex also commented on. You attend lots of different meetings, you hear lots of different things, and it's hard to retain lots, but the gentleman made an interesting point. He kind of flipped the paradigm when he said, what I've done, and I heard this maybe at some meeting, and is I invited the folks from Blue Cross Blue Shield to actually come to our center and facility. And I've been advocating my clients do this for years. These are just human beings, and they are responsible for managing relations, and they have budgets, and they get to make choices, they get to negotiate various deals, but remember, they're just human beings. They have jobs. If you reach out to them, again, change the paradigm, because they see you, they think that this is contentious, because oftentimes it is, because you get these term notices or you get these other letters from them. But the thought of actually reaching out and just educating them on what you're all about is an enormous, again, paradigm shift. It's not how we've historically thought about these. And what it does is, I agree with Bill, when the facts are known and the facts are out there, you win every single time. But if you don't get them educated about your business and how it functions, remember, their enrolled members are your patients. They want their enrolled members to have a great and positive experience. The worst thing for a health plan is turnover of members. So for them and for you, your incentives are actually aligned, but sometimes we don't think in those terms. Yes, sir.
The only thing we did is have them follow a patient from the exam through the surgery, and we showed them happy, satisfied patients. That's all we did.
Excellent.
Then we pulled them off in a supply room. We surrounded them with doctors, nothing fancy, and we just talked to them.
Well
We
done.
did the same thing with the U.S. Congressman 6 weeks before.
Well
So-
done. Thank you. Candy?
Quick question. In our market, most of the ACOs are owned by the big hospital system, so their goal is to keep all of the cases in-house. And maybe that's why you think the ACOs won't continue, but I just wonder how you see that evolving.
Okay. Any of our panelists want to tackle that? Trex?
Yeah, we're a member of the Pioneer ACO, and I think that the ACO is very well aware that our costs are significantly lower than they are at the hospital facilities that are within the Pioneer system, within the Partners Healthcare system. They do have number crunchers, and I think they can read black ink and red ink, and it is not a problem for them, and I think that it's encouraging. When my partners have discussed should we sell out to a hospital, the first thing I say is don't forget, you're about 40% less expensive on the facility side, and your copays are less than if you go to a hospital. Think about how much better you look to these groups that are negotiating.
And maybe I can just add to that a little bit by saying that, again, fear is the issue here, that when you look at the market, you think that there's going to be one extraordinarily dominant player who's going to control the entire market. And that may happen in very isolated markets, but for the most part, there's going to be competition. And for every group that makes a decision to go with a hospital or a hospital that wants to run this, there's going to be someone else who's going to come along that says they see an opportunity, and that opportunity is going to be us. And as long as you fight the feeling that you're going to sell out right now when it's kind of a buyer's market, wait around. There's going to be someone else who's going to come around who's going to be going after you, and the opportunities, I think, are going to become very significant for us, especially if we can band together and form larger groups where we have a little more buying power.
Yes, sir.
So,
Did you want to add to that, Bill?
Well, the only thing I was going to add is that, we hear about hospitals and health systems buying up physician practices, and anecdotally, what I'm hearing is the terms of those contracts are a lot tighter and shorter than they were the last time.
Absolutely.
Hospitals got into that marketplace. Again, I think that there'll be an opportunity, I think, for those physicians to hopefully look for a better place to land in a couple of years, and I think the ASC model's the perfect place for that.
Yes, sir.
yeah, that ties in nicely because with ASC you have a lot of GI docs, and they can't completely dissociate from the hospital because they bring patients back. Ophthalmologists, for the most part, completely dissociate from the hospital. And it's interesting to me how separate it's been because there's huge consolidation in many marketplaces. Obviously, it differs across the country. But as an example, New York marketplace, they buy doctors' practices like crazy. Whether that's a good or bad thing to do, you could certainly argue. But big hospital healthcare systems have even become insurers there. UPMC has a big insurance product. North Shore LIJ released its first insurance product this year. Insurers buy hospital systems. Highmark bought West Penn Allegheny.
Yes.
It's going to be very hard, I think, to stay outside as kind of an isolated cottage industry to some extent, although ophthalmology and ophthalmic ASCs have done it for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Where do you see it all going?
So I think this is, again, an important thing for us to keep in perspective, and I think kind of echoes what Eric is saying. For a hospital or health system that goes down this pathway, that are trying to kind of control risk and have market share, they don't need to own all their lines of distribution. Just let that settle in. They don't need to own, but it really lends itself towards a great opportunity. Don't we want to be the ones doing their ophthalmology? Now, they might employ ophthalmologists, which might make that a little bit more confounding, right? Because they might feel, but frankly, if they look at it from, I agree with Trex, if they look at it from a cost-benefit standpoint, I think they quickly find that outsourcing this actually makes a lot more sense. So I want to be the vehicle. I'll be happy to kind of work with them. If we have enough influence and scope in our market, if we have the right product, then we become the group, and maybe again it's a loosely affiliated network, maybe it's a larger integrated group. That would be a model that would appeal to me, and then I would be taking that product and saying we can handle all of this for you. Period. You don't have to worry about this. So even though, again, the systems will get larger and there's All these things are going on. Again, I think you just need to step back from that and think of the fact that we have the right product. And now that requires you to be open and willing to different payment modality.
But will you be able to sell it to more than one payer?
Yes.
Because as an example, well, you say that, but as an example, when Highmark bought West Penn, every patient at UPMC who had Highmark was thrown out. On that day, you could have been having 7 months of chemotherapy for lung cancer, and you were done.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure there are going to be isolated circumstances where those things will happen, and I know Eric has some of the same fear because he works in a market with a very, very large health system that is now attempting to amalgamate and put together market share. So there's no absolutes. But again, I think if we stack up against and we have the right business model, you're not going to win every fight, but you don't need to. One of our dear friends who's not here at this meeting, Rick Lewis, incoming president or president of ASCRS, Rick and I talk about this all the time. Rick has grown up in a market where when you started on day one, 55 to 60% of his market is not available to him. It's not available to him. It's Kaiser. So even in that environment, there's lots of ophthalmologists, and you know what? They all do pretty well because they're resourceful and they figure out who they can play with, and then they just have to be adaptable. So to me, that's a great learning. Even in the most mature markets where a significant percentage of market share is spoken for, you can find a way. You can find a way. And the ASC becomes, in my opinion, kind of a vehicle, which is in part why Rick and his colleagues built their ASC years ago. Okay, I want to introduce our last panelist. I'm not sure, Ralph, do you count as a panelist? I don't think so anymore.
Figurehead.
Yeah, figurehead. Oh, I like that. I like that. But these programs cannot exist without support. And I know, speaking for Kent and for Brad, and they expressed their gratitude earlier, but on behalf of the OOSS board, we're so grateful for the support of Abbott in sponsoring this program. Dr. Murthy Simhambhatla is president of Abbott Global. I want to get it right, Murthy.
It's Abbott Medical Optics.
Abbott Medical Optics, thank you. And he's here representing Abbott, and we're, again, so grateful for your support.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank the OOSS leadership for the invitation to participate on this panel. We've heard from the other speakers about all of the change going on in the U.S. healthcare system, and some of it does seem very challenging, even threatening. But the fact of the matter is that ASCs, surgeons, companies that offer innovative solutions will create new pools of successful enterprise in this environment. Change is a great catalyst. Status quo is where it's difficult to gain share, to expand your practice, etc. So I see change as a good thing. And I share Dr. Donenfeld's optimism for the future of ophthalmology. And this is based on three trends, really. We've talked about the demographic tide, which is real. But there's also a lot of unmet needs remaining still in ophthalmology, whether it's in cataract surgery, glaucoma, or retina. And, in terms of improving patient outcomes and improving the quality of care, new innovations will drive movement in that direction. And finally, you have the baby boom generation that we have talked about. They're willing to pay for solutions that offer better outcomes and better vision, provided the surgeon is convinced in the value of the technology. So industry has an obligation to continue to innovate here. So I just want to very briefly touch upon three trends to illustrate my point. First, the focus is on efficiency, and what more efficient structure than an ASC. ASCs are already highly efficient. There's great ideas on further improving productivity, and the industry is actively involved in brainstorming ideas, innovating around how to improve productivity in the OR. So we're looking at that. Secondly, there's some interesting questions that come up if ACOs were to grow or some other mechanism that's based on quality outcomes for the patients. As an example, you can take glaucoma. In an ACO environment or a patient quality of care environment, who's accountable for the care of a glaucoma patient who's not compliant with their eye drops? we're all accountable for it, because at the end of the day, we need to improve the quality of care for that patient. And there's innovations underway that I believe will make a significant impact on issues like this, such as minimally invasive glaucoma surgery, such as drug delivery devices that can move the needle on the quality of patient care. And finally, coming to patient-shared billing, I think this is a tremendous asset that ophthalmology has in the United States, somewhat uniquely so, because it's the ultimate safety pressure valve against reimbursement pressures. So what's the issue today? We saw the slides where premium IOLs and toric IOLs have leveled off. And what's the reason for that? Well, the reason for that is there's certain trade-offs today in terms of what surgeons can assure their patients of for improved outcomes and a full range of vision. The good news is that this is a field where everyone's interests are perfectly aligned. Patient interests, surgical center interests, surgeon interests, and the industry's interests. So there's a tremendous amount of investment that companies, including ours, are making to develop full range of vision intraocular lenses that reduce dysphotopsias and really give the surgeon confidence in implanting these in a broader range of patients. So again, you have innovations like laser cataract surgery that have the potential to improve patient outcomes as well. So I just want to summarize by saying I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of ophthalmology. As always, innovation's the key, and I'm personally excited because all of our interests are very aligned here. Thank you.
I get to close the session, I guess. So, I really think this was an incredible symposium we had at this meeting. I hope we can continue this collaboration and have panels like this in the future where we have some of the giants across the industry sort of sharing their knowledge. And again, I appreciate all of you for sharing your afternoon with us. One thing I took away is, where should I send my check to support these organizations? If it's only that small amount of money that can increase our voice, I think that was the biggest take home for me, is we need a voice, and I think there are people working hard to support us, and I think we need to get more involved, get our colleagues involved, and support those efforts. That's what OOSS is about. That's what ASCRS and the other AAO is trying to do. And I think now more than ever, I've taken away that we need to kind of be involved. So thank you again. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just, by the way, probably the answer to your question?
Yeah.
You can go to the OOSS and the ASCA websites, and you can find ways to get involved and to contribute both through politically and through grassroots action, and you should do both of those today.
Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your meetings.